Hello, my fellow East Texans and all those you wish you were. This is Adam Morrow with Express Employment Professionals. We're coming to you today from deep in the heart of the world headquarters of Mentoring Minds. And I'm here with Ashley Kutach, Vice President of People and a lot of other things. Thank you so much for having us today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
You got it. So we have an awesome opportunity today to follow up from the East Texas Employment Survey. Ashley honored us by being one of the panelists as we revealed that, and she did a great job of speaking to a couple of the questions on that survey. Many of you were in attendance there, and many of you had some follow-up questions, and so Ashley's been gracious enough to let us come over and just ask those questions. So you ready? Can I throw them at you?
I'm ready.
Excellent. So one of the things that you said that I thought was amazing, and so this is actually my insertion into this, is you talked about retention. And the questions that we were speaking to really had to do with how hard is it for people to get a hire. But we asked people, how long does it take you to hire somebody? It was 21 days. We asked, how hard is it to find people? And they said it was hard, about 65% of them. And so one answer to that is don't lose the people you have, so you don't have to find people. So you gave us some keys to retention. I think there were 4 of them. Can you hit those for us?
Sure, absolutely. So the first one is culture building, and that is actually a answer that came up to a variety of questions at the survey launch. So obviously this is a hot button. This is an important one to talk about. So just to give a little more information than I did during the launch luncheon, it's really important to think about what you want that culture to be. And I know that sounds so simple, but here's my thought. If you go to most businesses and you ask, do you have a company culture? Yes, we have one. Okay, what is it? Well, it's like hardworking, and then that's where you start to see, wow, we're not really sure exactly what that is. So picking some intentional things that could mirror your core values, or it could be slightly different. Maybe you consider your mission to be your culture and you build upon that. Whatever you want it to be, you have to do really intentional things to get there. So one of the things that has always been a part of our culture is that we want our employees, if they want to be able to have fun. So we created a committee called the Culture Club, and they have a very small budget. It doesn't take a lot of money to do this, but they're able to select and plan activities both for on-site and off-site people that will really help employees have fun, because that is a part of that's only one piece of our culture. So you have to consider all of the pieces of your culture. But if you don't do something intentional to make it what you want it to be, then it's not going to happen. So culture building isn't just going to be putting something up on the wall. It's going to be some intentional actions that have to happen.
So a couple steps: you have to identify what it is, but then you need to create structures and intentional actions to point your organization in that direction.
Yes, and I agree. And what we found was that, yes, maybe the owner of the company could do it, or the general manager can do it, or HR can do it. But when it comes from the team, when it comes from the people actually in the organization, that seems to be the most well received when those activities are actually, or activities, events, culture building, anything, when it comes from within, that tends to be, at least in our case, it's been better received.
The other side of that we've experienced, speaking of culture, is if you understand what your culture is, then you can identify people when you're hiring that align with your culture, which then is going to help you with retention, because you're not going to find them going sideways perhaps later down the road.
Absolutely. And a little bit later in one of the other answers to questions, I'm going to talk a little bit about core values, and I think that applies there as well.
Absolutely.
So the second one is having a good onboarding plan, and there is just hardly anything I can think of worse if I was a new employee than if I showed up and they weren't prepared for me. So onboarding starts way before the person actually walks in the door. There's not like it has to last this long, but most of the time it takes a solid 60 days, 90 days, maybe even a year-long onboarding plan, depending on the role and what is really necessary for that company and the position. So making sure that that they're prepared for when they walk in the door. But in addition to that, who do they need to meet? What do they need to know? How can we make that organized for them? I've talked to many people who say, I showed up at the first day, and even though I was greeted, I sat at my desk and I really wasn't sure what to do that first day. That's not a positive experience. If they're bored on their first day, that's not going to be the impression that they want. So making an impression early is important, but in addition to that, it's really making sure that person is prepared to be successful in that role. If they don't know what they need to know the people they need to know, and if you don't have a systematic approach to making sure that they learn the things they need to learn, it's probably not going to be a great experience, and they're likely to, unfortunately, move on. So, yeah.
Got it. So we have culture building, good onboarding.
And then career pathing.
Okay.
So that is something that we're seeing as being popular, not really with all generations. And as we look at having 3 generations of people in the workforce right now, this really is important to do across the board, but we're seeing with the younger generations is especially appreciated. So if I started a company as, I'll just pick a position, a customer service representative, then what's next for me? And it looks so far ahead to maybe be the customer service manager. Maybe that's a role that I might aspire to in 10 years, but what about me in the next year or 2 years? How can I grow? And when employees start thinking about the only way for me to grow is to jump somewhere else, that's where we tend to get some retention issues. And so if you have that new employee coming in, maybe you have a career path for them that says, once you're able to master these things and demonstrate these things, then you're going to move on to like a level 2. And then you can move on to a senior level position, and you can help them set goals in order to reach those milestones so that they feel like they do have a career path. And if you can tie some compensation along with that, that's great.
It doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt. It's not necessary. If your company can't do that, then certainly the career pathing is still important. But people need to know how to get somewhere bigger and better.
Sure. I could see how that would provide them a sense of direction within your organization.
Absolutely. And one thing I always try to do is not just make those milestones about the job tasks, make it about other things, your core values, about how they communicate, how they collaborate with others within the company, because they can sit and be the best, widget spinner all day long, but if they're not really collaborating and providing new ideas and generating excitement, then maybe that's not a senior level person. And so it gives you even more that you can be working on with them. So make those skills diverse that you're including.
Absolutely.
Yep.
That's great.
You ready for the final one?
Hit me.
Okay, so the final one has to do with career pathing, but it's a slightly different twist on that. It's really knowing where your people are going. So if you have that customer service representative, we're just going to keep using that example, but that customer service representative, as you're working with them through their career pathing, tells you that they really want to be a videographer. Well, they're not in that role. Maybe that role doesn't exist within your company, or maybe that role does exist within your company, but it's over in the marketing department, which is in a completely different department. Knowing that and being willing to work with those employees to get them that experience, I know it sounds like it may keep them around shorter, but actually usually keeps them around longer because they feel loyal to you for getting them where they want to go. And so true, they may get in a position and maybe they'll finish a degree 5 years from now that's going to be a next step for them as a career. But in that time, you have a really engaged, loyal, happy employee. And when employees are typically jumping jobs every 18 months, I'd rather keep someone to 3 to 4 years while I'm growing them to do something different. That's more desirable for me as the manager.
Absolutely. It is so expensive to turn that position over.
Yes.
Why not invest in that person in a way that's good for your company?
Yes. And if it's an easy one, like someone wants to move into sales and you have sales in your organization, there's some great, easy, free things that you can do to get them that exposure right then and there in your company. It's only going to make them better as an employee.
Outstanding. I'm glad you brought that up. One of the attendees at the luncheon had a question about tuition assistance. I think that may have been mentioned, and their comment is, we seem to be training employees for other employers at a considerable cost to ourselves, and we don't have a good career pathing process. So how do you approach that when you're thinking about investing in somebody? What do you think about that?
Well, and it can be with tuition assistance, but it could even just be with on-the-job training. You train them to be really good at this job. You know, you train them to be a great graphic designer, and then they go be a graphic designer somewhere else, and now you're out a fabulous graphic designer, whether school was involved or not. But specifically with tuition assistance, you know, kind of 3 rules of camp here. Some don't provide any. Some provide it only if it is specific to the role that they are in right now.
Okay.
And some companies provide it no matter what it is. So if I'm in HR, but I want to go get a marketing master's degree, then some companies. So, you know, it's really all over the board as far as what people provide. And I'm not seeing a lot of consistency within organizations as to which way they're choosing to go on that. It does, I understand the feeling of training someone up to feel like you're just giving them away. It goes back to that last answer, though. I really feel like if they believe that you are growing them and training them because you care about them as a person, that is going to make them a more loyal employee for the time that you do have them. So we had a perfect example of someone here in this organization that I'm getting a great opportunity to work with now. She was in sales, but said, I really want to be an HR person one day. Well, you don't just switch like that. It takes a lot of growth and learning opportunities. So it's taken years to really get her to the position where she could possibly leave and go be a very valued HR professional in another organization. But all during these years that we've been growing her, she has been an outstanding employee and has appreciated what we've been willing to pour into her, and therefore she pours back into the company every bit of that.
Wow.
So I think it's worth it.
Sure. I mean, what you're talking about is what's the return on investment of a really engaged employee, and what's the alternative? A disengaged employee, and there's probably a hidden cost there that you maybe not be calculating. So I like that image of somebody who's engaged and loyal, and even if maybe you lose them, it's a win, even in the short term.
It is. It is.
Another thing we talked about during the luncheon was, let's say we're searching for a specific skill set. In the market right now, unemployment's really low. The people that we're looking for, they may not be out there. And so when it comes down to it, and maybe you decide, okay, maybe I can train some of the skills I'm looking for. How do you have a process, or what could you say to somebody who is in that situation? How do you whittle it down to what's non-negotiable?
Well, the first way that I really start to whittle it down is if we don't have the skill here already, then I'm not going to be able to train that skill. So if I need someone who's coming in with a skill set that I really don't have, I don't mean me personally, I mean within the organization as a whole. So if I need a project manager, but there is no one here who really knows project management, short of sending them to school in some long drawn out, certification process, I'm not going to be able to train them on that. So that usually becomes my non-negotiable.
Sure.
Now, the one thing that usually holds people up is industry knowledge. People think they have to have industry knowledge. So a hospital wants someone who has hospital experience, even though it's an accounting person. Well, that typically I try not to make non-negotiable, because those types of things really can limit you in your candidate pool. So I think that's where a lot of companies get stuck, is I have to have someone with a particular industry type of experience. We cannot hire outside of that industry. The grocery industry, the hospital industry, in our case, the education industry. No one knows education unless you've come from education, so you've got to hire someone. Well, I don't know. Do you have to have a sales leader who is from that industry? Or if they can really sell anything and motivate a sales team, can't they learn the education side?
And that would be a competency of your organization.
That's right.
You may not be able to train something else, but you could certainly train them.
That's right. We know this piece.
Competency.
Right. We know this piece of the world, so we can train them on that. We need to bring someone in the door who has a piece that we don't have. Every once in a while, we have to switch, though. So we can't get so stubborn in our non-negotiables that when we're getting into a few weeks into this job search and we're not being successful, I always say we need to take a step back. maybe there's something else that we could go for that would be just as valuable, and maybe we'll have to get that piece that we thought was non-negotiable, we'll have to pull that in from somewhere else. So every once in a while that happens, and we have to be flexible.
Yeah, agility and flexibility when we're hiring right now, it seems to be a hallmark of a successful company. You gotta be. Okay, this is Mentoring Minds, so it's in the name. What could you say to somebody about mentoring?
Well, what I come across most often in mentoring is that companies love it, they want to do it, they assign mentors, maybe peer mentors when someone is brought in, but then that doesn't really go anywhere. And so, when thinking about a mentor program, I think it's really important to think about how prescriptive do you want to make it, and what do you want the outcomes to be. So sometimes making it more simple, if you can't really follow through with a very complex mentoring process, is better.
Okay.
So for example, say you have a new employee who's coming in, or someone who's moving a department even, assigning them someone that they're going to have coffee with twice a week just for the first couple of weeks.
Okay.
And giving that person that they're going to have, ideally it would be someone that's in their career pathing, right? Maybe they want to become a manager one day, and you can marry those two together and say, they want to become a manager, here's an employee who could use some help and mentorship as they're new in this department. We're going to put the two of them together, and giving them a little bit of structure, like here are the sorts of questions that you would want to talk about, but leave it casual and open. Sometimes that is so impactful and such a great experience for that new employee that coming up with a year-long formal mentoring program that may have fallen flat or fallen off the radar when times get busy, this was actually more impactful. So if an organization would like to do a mentoring program, and I do recommend it because mentors can be very inspirational and really help with retention, start simple. Instead of trying to come up with something really prescriptive.
That makes a lot of sense. What about when you're interviewing? I know, for example, in your field, you guys have employees around the country, and many times you may be recruiting from other areas around the country. When you're interviewing somebody who may be from a different part of the country, maybe California or New York, and their cultural background may be a little different. They're not from East Texas. Any tips on how to approach an interview like that?
Yeah, so one, I think it depends, in my mind it depends, is that person, we're wanting them to move to East Texas?
Okay.
Or we're wanting them to stay wherever it is that they're coming from. Because moving to East Texas as opposed to working for an East Texas company but still living in California are two different experiences for that person. Especially if we would hope that the person would move here, a couple of ideas. I always think it's nice to connect them with the Chamber of Commerce or some other resources within the community that are not part of our company that can give them information about East Texas. Another thing that you can do is connect them with maybe another employee who moved here from somewhere. It doesn't have to be the same place. Maybe you had an employee who moved here from Oklahoma, but now you're interviewing someone from Arizona. It still might be nice as part of the early interview process to connect them.
So they can be an interpreter.
Exactly. They can say, here's what my experience was, and make it apparent. Don't try to hide it, that is the purpose of the interview. Moving to another part of the country is a big deal. And we want you to know the experience that some other employees have had when they've had
Great idea.
If you don't have anyone within your company, go outside of your company. Go make friends with the company next door. Have you had anyone relocate? Maybe you can set up a time for the two of them to meet and hear firsthand what it's like to really move to a new place.
So you're giving that potential employee a really clear-eyed view as much as you can of what it's going to be like to be here.
Yes, absolutely. And then once that decision gets closer, obviously connecting them with the resources that they need, realtors that they need, moving agents that they need. Even if you don't provide a relocation package, you still want to make sure that they have the resources. So lean on the people in our community that you know that can provide good service to make it a good experience for them.
Absolutely. You mentioned, let's say you reel in some hotshot from California, and you've helped them get here, and it's their first day at Mentoring Minds. What would a first day at Mentoring Minds be like, or what would you recommend for somebody if they're thinking about how to bring somebody on board on their first day?
Well, I'll make this even maybe a little more generic answer. Whether we brought the hotshot in from California or whether it's someone who's lived here in Tyler their whole life and we're super excited to bring them on board. That first day of onboarding, as I mentioned earlier, is so important, not just that first day, but ongoing. So we have a fairly structured first few days. So when they show up, everything's ready for them. Someone's there to greet them. Their desk is clean and immaculate, and their computer is set up, and their passwords are ready for them, and everything is just really set and ready to go. We have a new system that allows us to do our onboarding paperwork in advance, which is always nice. We haven't had that in the past. So they're not walking in and having to do a bunch of paperwork. We're able to give them a brief tour, to have some friendly faces ready for them. Every Monday morning, which we typically start new hires on Monday, we have a company stand-up meeting. So the whole company joins together for a 5-minute recap of last week and preview of this week. So that's a great way for them to start their day. And what we do immediately after that is we have a meet and greet donut social. So drop-in donuts is what we call it. So
you do that on Mondays?
On Mondays if we have a new hire. Yes, Mondays if we have a new hire, we want people to drop by and introduce them to the new hire and grab a donut and just make it a really nice time. The rest of the day is filled with very specific things that are usually company related. We want them to understand our core values. We want them to understand a little bit about our history, start to understand our products, start to understand our customer. And so those first few days are really built out with things that no matter if they're going to be the CEO or if they're going to be someone else just creating the product or on the front lines, that they all get that really good dose of who we are and what our expectations are.
And that sounds great. What I really like about that is, of course, it's practical. You got to get them started to orient it to their job. They've got to feel for who is everybody in the company. I may not know everybody's name,
right,
but I'm kind of starting to get the landscape. And they were intentional. They're glad I'm here. And so it's not like you showed up and they're like, oh, who are you again?
Exactly.
Yeah. So
which I've heard horror stories of that happening.
I have too. So what a great start. That says to them, I've thought about you being here, and I'm really glad you're here.
Yes.
Okay, a couple of questions just about you. Inquiring minds want to know a little bit about who Ashley Kutach is. So, favorite podcast?
Okay, so right now my favorite podcast is a product management podcast. It's called This is Product Management. And even though I'm not in product management, it's a long series, so there's hundreds of podcasts in the series, and they all have to do would be helpful for any company that has a product, whether that be a service or an actual product. Talking about just the whole life cycle of that product. It has marketing information in there, it has product development information in there, and being a product-based company, it's really taught me a lot about many different areas that I just not usually exposed to in my everyday work. So right now, if I get on the treadmill or I'm in the car and want to listen to something, that's my go-to.
Man, you could find anything on a podcast.
I know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What about books? Anything you're reading right now that would be interesting?
Well, probably wouldn't be interesting. Most of what I'm reading right now and have been for the last couple of years are journal articles because I'm in school. So I spend so many hours reading journal articles that picking up a book really just isn't.
Yes, been there, done that.
Exactly,
Totally
exactly.
Yes.
So that's just kind of the stage that I am in life. But I typically like to read fairly often as part of my own goals that I set every year up until I started school. I would typically say I'm going to read at least this many books in that year and hold myself accountable to that. And I really just pick up whatever's interesting to me in the business section. I have a couple of books that I keep on my desk all the time.
Awesome.
Just in the last couple of years. This one's called Traction, and it's really about how do you formalize the way that you do business in order to get traction in your business. So, how do you organize meetings? How do you keep things going? How do you keep people going towards the right goals? And so that's a really neat book.
That sounds interesting. Gino Wickman, it looks like.
Yes, Gino Wickman is the author of that one. This one I mentioned at the lunch, survey launch, The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni. This actually is our core values at our company. And so I keep this one handy and reference it often.
Humble, hungry, and smart.
Humble, hungry, and smart. And so whenever I'm coaching employees or coaching managers to coach employees, I always come back to this. A lot of times it's not necessarily that they can't do the job, it's that they're struggling in one of the areas of our core values. And so this is like a handy just book that I keep on my desk that I reference really often, even though it's not new. And then I wouldn't do it justice if I didn't mention our book that just came out.
I'm so glad you brought that.
I'm not reading this because I helped write it, but
Sure.
Brian and Brant and I wrote this book, and it's a pretty quick read, but it's great to do as a group study. And so if you want to get your team together, everyone read a chapter. It has group discussion questions at the end, and can really be just a fun book to work through individually or as a group.
Absolutely. I got mine last week.
Good.
I'm halfway through it. And what I can tell right now is it's very practical. You guys have done a great job at the end of each chapter. I could, whether I'm by myself or engaging in a group, particularly at work, in a work setting, it's going to make me a better leader if I follow what you said.
That's great to hear.
I'd recommend it, guys.
Great, great.
All right, a couple other hot topics here. Lots of people I hear talk about generations in the workplace. So the millennials are moving solidly into the workforce. Gen Z's right behind them, entering the workforce now. Any tips to those of us who are managing who may be of an older generation than those?
Ask questions
Okay. Tell me more
instead
about
of
that.
making assumptions. And so
That's probably really good advice, just in general.
just in general. But, just being in a different generation than a lot of the people that we're hiring new into the organization, I may make assumptions about what they want, what they need, how they want their work environment to be. And so I've had to learn to ask more questions and not assume that people want it the way that I want it. So I tend to like things pretty structured. I like to have meetings and go through agendas, and sometimes that's not what that employee needs. That could be generational difference, or it could just be a person difference. And I know that we cannot adapt everything that we do to every individual. That would be impossible. But when you're hearing trends, when you're hearing groups of people say the same thing, then that's important to take notice of. And we can be, strange, I've already used the word stubborn once, we can be stubborn and say that's not how we do it around here, but that's not going to help with retaining people who you need their talent to be here. And so listening, asking, listening, and then being flexible enough to listen when you hear people saying similar things, I think it's critical with the new generation.
That sounds like really good advice, like I said, just in general, but a posture of seeking to understand and being willing to be flexible where you can.
Yes.
And I think in my experience, people who do that will be rewarded with some really good employees.
Yeah, agreed.
So just a little bit of a forecast in your own business and your industry. What's your forecast for your business moving forward? How are things looking?
Yeah, right now is a good time. Things are looking positive, not just in East Texas, but I think Texas in general, and then just in our industry. So, every industry has its ups and downs, and there's always talk about funding, and I know you see that in your business as well. And, the thing that I always try to remember is even though funding goes up and down, when people need something, when people really need something and they feel like they can't live without it, then they somehow find ways to get it when possible. And so I think the reason why I feel so positive moving forward is that I feel like we put things in place that, I use two words and my employees hear it all the time, make our customers happy and sticky. If they're happy and sticky, they're going to come back no matter what is going on around them because they want the best for their kids. And they're going to get the best for their kids at any cost. And so I think that I feel very positive about the direction that we're going. And then East Texas, look around. A lot of people moving into the area. There's a lot of growth. That means new talent coming in. It means new opportunities for people. So I think things are looking very positive overall.
That's great to hear from you and from others as well. It's a really exciting time to be in East Texas.
It is.
Ashley, thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, thank you, Adam.
You're a great friend to Express and a great representative for Mentoring Minds, so really appreciate your wisdom you shared with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You bet.
All right. Bye.
Bye.